So in front of me here is a brand new system from Bosgame called the P1. It's under their new Ryzen series of mini PCs. It's definitely a weird name for it, but I get what they're going for in that this chip is actually extremely efficient. Now, if you're curious who exactly Bosgame is, you really just need to flip over the box and read the manufacturer here to kind of understand who it is. Now, this Shenzhen-based company name here, you might not know it, or you might know it by its colloquial name, AZW. They are actually the owners of the B-Link brand, and they are an OEM, which means that other companies can go to them and have them manufacture systems for them using their already existing designs, most of the time slightly modified. Now, I'm not 100% sure if Bosgame is its own separate company or if it's owned by AZW, as they do have multiple sub-brands. B-Link being their main one, but they also do have Tricky. And I'm pretty positive that this Bosgame company is also a part of that umbrella corporation. And when you look at the design of the P1, it is strikingly similar to the Sur 5. But this system itself is not actually just a rebadged Sur 5, because it actually has a very good feature. It includes 2.5 gigabit LAN, and the configuration that I have comes with 32 gigabytes of RAM and a 1 terabyte SSD. This all paired with that 5700U makes this a really effective home server system. So let's jump in and actually take a look at some of the performance numbers that it has, because there is a lot of power in a very small package here. First of all, in single core performance, we aren't going to be looking at class-leading performance by any means, but it is still going to be at essentially the same level of every other system at this price point, only really losing out to any Zen 3 based systems, and even then by not a significant margin, and it easily clears pretty much any systems that you're going to find in the sub $200 category. It's really going to take Zen 3 and Zen 4 based systems to really actually have a meaningful lead over this chip, as even 12th gen and 13th gen based systems, if they don't have enough power, will fall short in terms of the multi-core performance, even though on paper they have more individual cores. All those individual cores do just need more power to actually function properly. That's one of the biggest benefits of the 5700U in this system, is that it's extremely efficient. At just 25 watts of TDP, it's able to pretty much get the maximum performance that it can out of this chip, and that means that it is going to stay cool and quiet during pretty much all operation. The gaming performance of a system like this is also going to be significantly better than pretty much anything below this price point, which is around the $250 to $300 price range, as most things in this price range are going to be rocking Vega-based integrated graphics, and the benefit of the 5700U over something like the 5560U or 5500U is not just the extra CPU cores, but the extra GPU cores with a higher clock speed. It's not going to make earth-shattering differences in most titles, but you at least do know that here you are getting the vast majority of the performance that you're going to be getting out of Vega-based integrated graphics, as it's not really a cut-down version, since it's the full 8 cores, and the only difference between something like the 5800H is just going to be the maximum clock speed that GPU can get to, and it's really not that different. We're talking about 100 to 200 megahertz different at most. And what that really translated to was effectively a large assortment of different titles actually just being playable on here at reasonable enough graphics settings. You're certainly not going to be playing the latest titles at even low settings without having to use something like FSR at some pretty aggressive settings, but if you're a patient gamer type that likes to pick up titles extremely cheap and don't really care if they're 5+ years old, well, you're going to have a lot of titles with a system like this that you're actually going to be able to play through and get some pretty decent experiences. Some of the highlights, of course, being games like Alien Isolation, which do in fact run at the ultra graphics settings. The vast majority of things, though, are going to be running at a low to medium graphics range if you're going to want to keep around a 60 FPS average, though there are significant titles out there that you are going to be able to get above 60 pretty consistently. Though titles like Counter-Strike 2 have made systems like this a tough sell if you're looking to play esports titles like that, Rainbow Six Siege and Valorant both run extremely well on this system to the point where, unless you're specifically playing Counter-Strike, you could pretty much get away with a lot with a system like this. But do keep in mind that FSR is not going to be able to save a lot of even newer titles, as you can see with Assassin's Creed Mirage, where even keeping a 30 FPS average seems to be a struggle in a lot of parts. And in general, the level of performance that you're going to get, even with the most aggressive FSR settings, is going to make it so that you're realistically not going to end up playing the game on here. But as I said, there's still a wide assortment of different games that are actually very playable on a system like this. Now, the inclusion of the 2.5 gigabit NIC is what made this the most interesting to me, because a system like this, you could pretty much just end up installing Linux, and that's exactly what I ended up doing, installing Nobara Linux, one of my favorite distros since it's pretty much based on Fedora, but comes with enough goodies that are going to make the day-to-day Linux user experience just overall better for most people out there. So going through the entire install process of that, I was pretty much able to get the system set up extremely quickly, and in general already everything felt extremely snappy and extremely smooth. And that's one of the biggest benefits of going with Linux, is that the operating system is just so much lighter and there's so few things running in the background that your system just feels significantly faster. And well, that's pretty much what makes Linux such an attractive OS for something like this, because that 2.5 gigabit NIC gives us actually a lot of flexibility here, because really there's a lot of computing power in a system like this. So you install Linux, you can install Docker extremely easily, then you just install Portainer, and now you're able to actually run Docker containers in the background while still using this as a day-to-day computer, because you don't need 8 cores to watch YouTube videos. You don't need 8 cores to sit there scrolling through Reddit or hanging out on Discord or just doing any of the other things that people do on their computers. Even gaming is not going to use all 8 of those cores. Your iGPU is going to be your limiting factor almost every time, which means you're going to have a lot of cores and a lot of RAM just sitting there doing nothing. And while Windows would love to just use that extra CPU power and RAM for all the telemetry that's going on where Microsoft is just collecting all your data, why not use it for something better? Since you're running Docker and Portainer on a system like this, what you could pretty much end up doing is start to install dedicated servers for games that you play. I personally run a Valheim and a Conan Exiles dedicated server on a system that is orders of magnitude slower than this thing. And the benefit of that 2.5 gigabit NIC is that as you start to use this as a server, multiple systems connecting here to access stuff is not going to bog down the connection that you have here. You could pretty much still have 2 full clients hitting it at their full gigabit bandwidth, and you'd still have some headroom left over for the system itself. Now, of course, you would need to have 2.5 gigabit networking across your entire home if you actually want to take full advantage of this. But having a switch where this is connected to 2.5 gigahertz, having a switch where this is connected to 2.5 gigabit, and your main system is hooked up to 2.5 gigabit, and then the rest of your systems are just hooked up over standard gigabit. As I said, that still means that 2 gigabit clients could be hitting the system at their maximum bandwidth, accessing files, and it still won't affect the day-to-day usage of a system like this. You could pretty much put a system like this underneath your TV in the living room, use it as a media PC, and have all of your services running on it 24/7, and it won't break a sweat doing any of that. Of course, that's only if you actually want to use the system as a day-to-day system. If you don't mind setting it up as a full-time server, if that's your intention for it, well, you have options with things like Unraid and Proxmox. And considering that I am in the middle of upgrading my home network to actually support multi-gigabit, since AT&T did just roll out 2 gigabit plans and 5 gigabit plans in my city, I'm very tempted to upgrade and get set up with some extremely fast networking across my entire home setup. But of course, the cost of all of that is extremely high. But a system like this makes it so that once you have all that networking set up, you can have a server that takes advantage of that networking, that has a lot of power to it for not a lot of money, and it's not going to eat up a lot of power. And the power savings are really one of the biggest saving graces, considering that a lot of people still love to use old Xeons for server hosting. And while old Xeons are great in terms of how much you save up front, the amount of power that they end up using in comparison to a system like this, this thing pretty much pays for itself in the long run, considering that realistically you're going to be running a server for quite a few years, if you're at least being effective with what you're getting. If you get the itch to upgrade every 6 months, then something like this doesn't make any sense. But if you're just looking for a system that you could plop down, set up, and have up and running for the next decade, this is pretty much it. And that's exactly what this P1 is actually going to end up doing. So get subscribed if you're not subscribed, if you're interested in seeing this system running Proxmox, and I might actually even test Unraid on here, since I'm personally a huge fan of Unraid when it comes to getting set up with a Docker environment as quickly as possible, especially for beginners. So stay tuned for that.